The bowl slipped from her trembling fingers before she even realized what was happening, and suddenly, 16 ounces of lobster bisque were cascading down the front of the most beautiful and terrifying man she had ever seen. Rose Ashford stood frozen in absolute horror, watching the steaming orange liquid drip from the pristine white collar of his tailored black suit. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The elegant dining room of Nocturne, the most exclusive establishment in the city, fell into a silence so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. This was her third shift. Her third shift, and she had just dumped scalding soup all over what looked like European royalty. She waited for the explosion, for the screaming, for the inevitable firing that would send her back to her cramped studio apartment with no way to pay next month's rent. But instead, the man simply looked down at his ruined jacket, then up at her, and laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a forced acknowledgement. It was genuine laughter, rich and warm, that seemed to fill the space around them. His eyes, impossibly silver in the dim candlelight, sparkled with genuine amusement as he dabbed at his chest with his napkin. "Well," he said, his accent placing him somewhere in Eastern Europe, "that certainly woke me up more effectively than the wine." Rose finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a squeak. "I'm so sorry. Oh my God. I'll pay for the cleaning. I don't even know what I'll do, but I'm so sorry." She grabbed napkins from the neighboring table, her hands shaking so badly she nearly knocked over a water glass in the process. When she reached toward him to help clean the mess, he caught her wrist gently. His skin was cold, not cool, but genuinely cold, like he'd been standing outside in winter rather than sitting in a temperature-controlled restaurant. "You're trembling," he observed, releasing her immediately. "Please don't distress yourself, it's only a suit." "A suit that probably costs more than my car," Rose muttered, then immediately wished she could swallow the words. She wasn't supposed to mention things like that to customers, especially not customers who dined in the private section of Nocturne, where reservations required a 6-month waiting list and a bank account with several zeros. His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just a touch too white, too sharp. "I have others, but I don't believe I have your name yet. That seems like information I should possess given the intimacy of having your soup in my lap." Despite everything, the disaster, the mortification, the fact that her manager was probably going to fire her the second this man left, Rose felt an unexpected bubble of something like laughter rise in her chest. Rose. Rose Ashford. Rose. He repeated her name like he was tasting it, rolling it around in his mouth to savor the flavor. How fitting. Beautiful, but with hidden thorns. He stood, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with stark white hair that fell to his shoulders in a way that should have looked strange, but instead looked regal. His skin was pale as marble, and in the low light, he seemed to almost glow. "I am Konstantin Bathory, and I believe I would very much like to see you again, Rose Ashford, preferably under circumstances that don't involve scalding liquids." Before she could process what was happening, he had produced a card from his jacket pocket, somehow still dry despite the soup catastrophe, and pressed it into her palm. His fingers lingered just a moment longer than necessary, cold against her skin. You want to see me again?" Rose couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "I just ruined your night." "On the contrary," Konstantin said, his silver eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "You made it considerably more interesting than it would have been otherwise. Call me Rose. Tomorrow, if you're brave enough." He left $300 bills on the table, an absurd tip for a meal he hadn't finished, and walked out of Nocturne with soup still dripping from his jacket, leaving Rose standing in the middle of the dining room with a business card clutched in her hand and absolutely no idea what had just happened. Her manager, Marcus, appeared at her elbow within seconds. "What did he say to you?" "He laughed and asked my name and gave me his card." Rose looked down at the heavy cardstock in her hand. It was black with silver lettering that simply read, "Konstantin Bathory," followed by a phone number. No title, no business, nothing else. Marcus's face had gone pale. "Bathory? Oh, God. Rose, do you know who that is?" She shook her head, still staring at the card. "That's Konstantin Bathory. He owns half the city. Hotels, restaurants, real estate if it's valuable. And in downtown, he probably has a stake in it, including Nocturne. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, looking genuinely shaken. He owns this restaurant, Rose. You just dumped soup on our owner. The room tilted slightly. Rose reached out to steady herself on the nearest chair. I'm fired. Are you kidding? He left a $900 tip and gave you his personal number. I don't know what just happened, but you're definitely not fired. Marcus peered at her more closely. Are you okay? You look like you're going to pass out. I might, Rose admitted. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright was starting to fade, leaving her legs weak and her head spinning. I need to sit down. Marcus guided her to a chair in the back, away from the customers. Another waitress brought her water, whispering questions about what the mysterious man in the private section had said. Rose answered automatically, her mind still trying to process the encounter. Konstantin Bathory. The name sounded familiar, though she couldn't place where she'd heard it before. Somewhere in the society pages she occasionally skimmed while waiting in line at the grocery store, probably. The kind of person who appeared at charity galas and exclusive events, whose comings and goings were tracked by people who cared about such things. And he wanted her to call him. Rose looked at the card again, running her thumb over the raised lettering. It was probably a joke. Rich people did things like that, didn't they? Made grand gestures that meant nothing, handed out business cards they didn't expect anyone to actually use. He'd probably forgotten about her before he even made it to his car. But his eyes. She couldn't stop thinking about his eyes, that impossible silver color, and the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious rather than a clumsy waitress who'd just ruined his evening. The way he'd caught her wrist so gently, despite the fact that she'd dumped hot soup down his front. The way he'd said her name. You're going to call him, aren't you? Marcus asked, watching her face. I don't know, Rose said honestly. Probably not. People like that don't actually want to hear from people like me. He gave you his personal card and told you to call him. That seems pretty clear. Marcus glanced toward the private dining section where busboys were now cleaning up the table. Though I have to admit, I'm curious what he wants with you. Bathory doesn't date. At least, not that anyone's ever seen. He comes here once a month, always alone, orders the same wine and leaves. He's polite but distant. I've never seen him laugh before, let alone give anyone his phone number. That made Rose feel slightly better, and significantly more confused. If he didn't date, what did he want with her? Surely not actually to see her again. Maybe he was just being kind, trying to make her feel better about the accident. That made more sense than the alternative. She finished her shift in a daze, going through the motions of taking orders and delivering food without really being present. Her mind kept drifting back to those silver eyes, that cold touch, that rich laugh. By the time she clocked out at midnight, she'd almost convinced herself the entire encounter had been a stress-induced hallucination. Almost. The card was still in her pocket when she got home to her tiny studio apartment, proof that it had really happened. She set it on her nightstand and stared at it while she changed into pajamas. Call me tomorrow if you're brave enough, he'd said. Was she brave enough? Rose wasn't sure she'd ever been particularly brave. She'd moved to the city 3 months ago after her mother's death, leaving behind a small town where everyone knew her story. The sad girl whose father left when she was 10, whose mother died of cancer just after her 23rd birthday, who worked herself half to death trying to pay off medical bills and had nothing to show for it, but dead in exhaustion. She'd come here for a fresh start, for a chance to be someone new, someone who wasn't defined by loss and struggle. But calling a wealthy, powerful man who'd shown her unexpected kindness felt like a different kind of bravery than she possessed. What would she even say? Thank you for not being angry about the soup? Sorry again about your suit? Let's meet for coffee so I can feel inadequate about every aspect of my life in comparison to yours? Rose turned off the light and pulled the covers up to her chin, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw silver ones staring back at her. The next morning, she almost threw the card away 3 different times. She held it over the trash can while making coffee, reconsidered while eating toast, and came dangerously close again while getting dressed for her afternoon shift. But each time, something stopped her. The memory of his voice, maybe, or the way he'd looked at her like she mattered. By noon, she'd talked herself into at least sending a text. That was less intimidating than calling, required less bravery, and gave her an easy out if he didn't respond or made it clear he'd just been being polite. She typed and deleted half a dozen messages before finally settling on something simple. "Hi, this is Rose Ashford from Nocturne. I wanted to apologize again about your suit and thank you for being so kind about it." She hit send before she could overthink it, then immediately regretted every word choice. Too formal? Not formal enough? Should she have been more casual, less apologetic? She was spiraling into anxiety when her phone buzzed less than 30 seconds later. "Rose, I was hoping you'd be brave. Are you free this evening?" Her heart rate kicked up. He'd responded immediately. He remembered her. He wanted to see her. "Tonight." "I have a shift until 11, she typed back. "Perfect. I'll send a car for you at 11:15. We'll have a late dinner." A car? He was sending a car for her. Rose stared at her phone, trying to decide if this was wildly romantic or mildly concerning. She didn't actually know this man. He could be anyone, despite the expensive suit and the restaurant ownership. Meeting him alone, at night, after he sent a car to pick her up, felt like the beginning of a true crime documentary. But something about him had felt safe, despite the strangeness. The way he'd been so careful with her wrist, the warmth in his laugh, the genuine amusement rather than anger. Rose had gotten fairly good at reading people during her years of waitressing, and Konstantin hadn't set off any of her internal alarms. If anything, she'd felt drawn to him in a way she couldn't quite explain. "Okay," she typed, making a decision that felt either very brave or very stupid. "Thank you. I'll see you tonight." "I'm looking forward to it, Rose." She saved his number and spent the rest of the day veering between excitement and terror. A date. She was going on a date with Konstantin Bathory, mysterious owner of half the city, who looked like a prince from a Gothic fairy tale and had eyes like liquid silver. It was insane. It was probably a mistake. But God, she wanted to see him again, wanted to know if the strange pull she'd felt was real or just a product of adrenaline and embarrassment. Her shift at Nocturne dragged interminably. Every time she delivered soup, any kind of soup, she had to fight not to think about the previous night. Marcus caught her checking her phone twice and gave her a knowing look but didn't comment. At 10:30, she asked if she could leave 15 minutes early to freshen up, and he waved her off with a grin. "Have fun with your billionaire," he said. "And be careful. Men like that usually want something." Rose thought about that while she reapplied lipstick in the bathroom mirror. What could Konstantin possibly want from her? She had nothing to offer someone like him, no money, no connections, no particular skills or talents beyond the ability to balance multiple plates at once. Unless Marcus was implying something else, something that made her stomach twist uncomfortably. But no. Konstantin hadn't looked at her like that. His interest had seemed genuine, curious rather than predatory. She was probably overthinking everything, a talent she'd honed to perfection over years of anxiety. The car was waiting when she stepped outside at exactly 11:15. Not a car, actually a town car with a driver in a proper uniform who opened the door for her and called her Miss Ashford. Rose slid into the leather interior feeling completely out of her element. The seats were heated. There was a bottle of water waiting for her in the cup holder. Soft classical music played through speakers she couldn't see. "Where are we going?" she asked the driver. "Mr. Bathory's residence, miss. About 20 minutes from here." His residence. So not a restaurant, not a public place. Rose's earlier concerns flickered back to life, but she pushed them down. If Konstantin had wanted to harm her, there were easier ways than sending a professional car service and making small talk first. And if she was wrong, well, she had pepper spray in her purse and a phone to call for help. The city lights slipped past the windows as they drove deeper into the historic district where old mansions sat behind iron gates and ancient trees. Rose had been to this neighborhood exactly once on a tourist walking tour shortly after she'd moved to the city. It was the kind of place where people who appeared in Forbes articles lived, where property values made her monthly rent look like pocket change. The car pulled through a gate that opened automatically, following a curved driveway to a house that could only be called a mansion. 3 stories of Gothic architecture rose before her, all dark stone and elegant windows, with ivy climbing the walls and gas lamps flickering on either side of the entrance. It looked like something from another century, perfectly preserved and utterly intimidating. The driver opened her door and offered his hand to help her out. "Mr. Bathory is waiting for you in the dining room, straight through the entrance and to your left." Rose climbed the steps on shaking legs, her work flats looking painfully out of place against the elegant stonework. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal Konstantin himself, and she forgot to breathe. He was even more striking than she remembered. He'd changed into dark slacks and a deep burgundy shirt that made his white hair seem to glow in the lamplight, his silver eyes fixed on her immediately, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Rose, you came. You sent a very nice car," she said, then winced at how inadequate that sounded. "I mean, thank you for inviting me. Your home is beautiful. Come in, please. I promise I don't bite." Something about the way he said it made it sound almost like a private joke, but Rose couldn't imagine what the humor was. He stepped aside to let her enter, and she found herself in a foyer that belonged in a museum. Dark wood panels lined the walls, and a crystal chandelier cast prismatic light across marble floors. Oil paintings in ornate frames depicted scenes she didn't recognize, battles and ceremonies that looked ancient and foreign. "This way," Konstantin said, placing his hand lightly on the small of her back to guide her. Even through her shirt, his touch was cold, just as it had been the night before. "I thought we could have dinner and talk, get to know each other beyond the dramatic circumstances of our first meeting." He led her to a dining room that was only slightly less intimidating than the foyer. A table that could have seated 20 had been set for 2 at one end, with candles and wine and covered dishes waiting. He pulled out her chair before she could do it herself, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that made her feel simultaneously cherished and completely out of her depth. "I should warn you," Konstantin said as he took his own seat across from her. "I'm not actually eating tonight. I had a large meal earlier. But please, enjoy. I had my chef prepare something special." He lifted the cover from her plate to reveal what looked like a gourmet meal worthy of any 5-star restaurant. Some kind of perfectly cooked fish with asparagus and a sauce that smelled incredible. Rose's stomach growled, reminding her that she'd been too nervous to eat much during her shift. "This looks amazing," she said. "But won't it be weird if I'm eating and you're not? I'll keep you company with wine." He poured himself a glass of something dark red, so dark it was nearly black. "And I'll enjoy watching someone appreciate Mikhail's cooking. He complains that I don't eat enough." Rose took a bite and nearly moaned. Whatever Mikhail was being paid, it wasn't enough. "This is incredible. I mean, really incredible. Thank you." My pleasure." Konstantin leaned back in his chair, cradling his wine glass, studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "Tell me about yourself, Rose Ashford, beyond the fact that you work at Nocturne and have excellent aim with soup." She laughed despite her nervousness. "There's not much to tell, honestly. I moved here 3 months ago from a small town upstate. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, which is a very long-winded way of saying I have no idea what I'm doing. The waitressing is temporary until I figure things out." She paused, then decided honesty was the best approach. "And I'm probably the least interesting person you could have invited to dinner, so I'm honestly confused about why I'm here." "You're here because you made me laugh," Konstantin said simply. "Do you know how rare that is? How long it's been since something genuinely surprised and delighted me?" His silver eyes seemed to catch the candlelight, reflecting it back like a mirror. "You stood there covered in embarrassment, trembling like a leaf, and offered to pay for my suit cleaning. You were terrified but still trying to make it right. It was charming. You are charming." Rose felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I dumped soup on you. That's not charming, that's clumsy. It's human." The way he said the word made it sound important, weighted with meaning she didn't understand. "Beautifully, perfectly human. You have no idea how refreshing that is." She didn't know what to say to that, so she took another bite of her dinner and tried to collect her thoughts. Konstantin waited patiently, sipping his wine and watching her with that unwavering attention. "What about you?" she finally asked. "Marcus said you own half the city, but that can't be all you do. What's your story?" Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to identify. "My story is long and not particularly cheerful. I've lived in the city for many years, building businesses and acquiring property. I prefer to keep to myself generally. I don't socialize much, don't attend the parties and galas that people expect of someone with my resources. I find most people tedious. But not me. Rose couldn't help the skeptical note in her voice. I'm a broke 23-year-old waitress with student debt and no prospects. How am I less tedious than socialites and business people? You're real, Konstantin said. You're not performing or trying to impress me or angling for something. You're just Rose, who's nervous and honest and kind, even when you're terrified. That's rarer than you think. He set down his wine glass and leaned forward, his expression earnest. I know this is strange. I know I'm probably moving too fast and being too intense. But the moment you looked up at me last night, covered in mortification and apologies, something shifted. I wanted to know you. I still want to know you. If you'll let me. Rose's heart was racing again, that same feeling from the night before, flooding back. The sense that something significant was happening, that she was standing at a crossroads where one path led back to her safe, predictable life, and the other led somewhere completely unknown. She thought about her mother, who'd always told her to be careful, to play it safe. But her mother had also told her, near the end, to be brave, to take chances, to live fully while she could. Okay, Rose heard herself say. Okay, yes, I want to know you too. Even though this is probably crazy and I should be more careful and you're definitely too good to be true. Konstantin's smile could have lit the room. I promise you, I am very far from too good to be true. I have many flaws, Rose, but I will do my best not to let them hurt you. They talked for hours. Rose finished her dinner and had dessert, a chocolate creation that was sinful, while Konstantin nursed his wine and asked her questions. He wanted to know everything, her favorite books, her childhood memories, what she'd wanted to be when she grew up, why she'd moved to the city. She found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone, stories about her mother's illness and her own grief, her fears about the future, and her hope that she could build something meaningful from the wreckage of the past year. In return, he told her carefully edited versions of his own history. He'd grown up in Eastern Europe, he said, in a very old family with strict traditions. He'd traveled extensively, lived in dozens of cities, seen empires rise and fall. He talked about it like he'd studied it rather than lived it, but Rose chalked that up to dramatic flair. He was clearly educated and well-read, dropping references to historical events and literary works with casual ease. But he also didn't talk about friends or family, she noticed. No mention of parents or siblings, no stories about childhood friends or past relationships. When she asked gently if he was close with his family, his expression shuddered. I have associates, others like me, but I wouldn't call them family, not in the way you mean. He paused, seeming to struggle with something. I'm quite alone, actually. By choice, mostly. It's easier that way. That sounds lonely, Rose said softly. It is. His eyes met hers, and she saw something ancient and sad in them. But perhaps it doesn't have to be any more. The weight of that statement sat between them, heavy with implication. Rose knew she should probably be more cautious, should pump the brakes on whatever this was becoming. But sitting across from Konstantin in the candlelight, she didn't want to be cautious. She wanted to be brave. I should probably go, she said reluctantly, glancing at her phone. It was past 2 in the morning. I have another shift tomorrow, later today. Of course. Konstantin stood immediately, ever the gentleman. I'll have Thomas drive you home. But Rose, may I see you again? Tomorrow night, perhaps, after your shift? Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I'd like that. He walked her to the door, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. She could see him considering it, leaning slightly closer, his silver eyes dropping to her lips. But then he seemed to think better of it, and instead lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent shivers up her arm. Sleep well, Rose Ashford. Dream of me. She did dream of him when she finally fell into bed as the sun was rising, strange, vivid dreams of silver eyes and cold hands and a voice calling her name through darkness. She woke feeling oddly exhausted, as if she'd been running all night instead of sleeping. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Rose saw Konstantin almost every night after her shifts at Nocturne, sometimes at his mansion and sometimes at other locations around the city. He took her to a private art gallery after hours where they had the entire building to themselves, and he explained the history behind paintings that predated photography. He brought her to a rooftop garden hidden atop one of his buildings, where rare flowers bloomed under carefully controlled lights, and the city sprawled below them like a carpet of stars. He was unfailingly courteous, endlessly generous, and increasingly affectionate. He held her hand during their walks, kept his arm around her shoulders when they sat together, pressed kisses to her temple and cheeks with a tenderness that made her ache. But he never pushed for more, never suggested she stay the night or tried to take things beyond those gentle touches. Rose should have been grateful for his restraint, but increasingly she found herself wanting more. There were strange things, though. Things that didn't quite add up. Konstantin never ate in front of her, always claiming he'd had a large meal before they met. She never saw him in daylight. All their meetings were late at night, and on the rare occasions she suggested something during the day, he had business commitments he couldn't break. His skin was always cold, almost corpse cold, though he claimed it was poor circulation. And his staff, the few times she encountered them, were oddly deferential, treating him less like an employer and more like nobility from another age. But the strangest thing was the way people reacted to him when they were out together. The few times they'd been in public, Rose had noticed people giving them a wide berth, averting their eyes when Konstantin looked at them. Once, a man had literally crossed the street to avoid walking past them. When she'd asked about it, Konstantin had dismissed it as the natural response to wealth and power. People were intimidated by success. Rose might have believed that if she hadn't seen the fear in their eyes. She was sitting at a coffee shop on her day off, 3 weeks into whatever she and Konstantin were building, when someone sat down across from her uninvited. Rose looked up from her laptop to find a woman watching her intently. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that seemed to look straight through her. "You're the girl," the woman said without preamble, "the one Konstantin Bathory has been seen with." Rose closed her laptop slowly, every instinct telling her to be careful. "Do I know you?" "No, but I know what he is, and you need to hear the truth before you're in too deep to escape." The woman leaned forward, her voice low and urgent. "Konstantin Bathory is not human, Rose Ashford. He's a vampire, one of the oldest and most powerful in the city, and if you don't get away from him now, you'll either end up dead or worse." For a long moment, Rose could only stare at her. Then, despite the serious expression on the woman's face, despite the fear creeping up her spine, she laughed. "A vampire, right, and I'm a werewolf. This is a joke, right?" "I wish it was." The woman pulled out her phone and brought up a series of photos. "This is Konstantin Bathory in 1952. She swiped. "This is him in 1898, and this is a painting from 1756. Same man, Rose, same face, same white hair, same agelessness. He's been in this city for over 2 centuries, and before that, he was in Europe for God knows how long." Rose looked at the photos. Her stomach dropped. The clothing was different. The image quality varied from modern digital to faded sepia to old oil painting. But the face was unmistakable. Konstantin, looking exactly as he did now, staring out from different eras of history. This is edited, photoshopped. It has to be." But her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. "His name is Konstantin Bathory," the woman continued relentlessly. "Bathory, as in Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess. He's descended from one of the most notorious vampire bloodlines in history. He rules the vampire community in this city, what they call the court, and humans who get involved with him have a tendency to disappear." "Who are you?" Rose demanded, her hands shaking. "Why are you telling me this?" "My name is Diana Cross. My sister was involved with one of Konstantin's associates 5 years ago. We found her drained and dumped in an alley. The police ruled it an animal attack, but I know what really happened." Diana's eyes were hard with old grief. "I've spent the last 5 years learning everything I can about the vampire community in this city, trying to find a way to bring them down, or at least expose them. When I heard Konstantin was seeing someone new, I had to warn you." Rose's mind was reeling. Vampires. The woman was talking about vampires like they were real, like they existed outside of movies and books. It was insane. Except it would explain so much. The cold skin, the aversion to daylight, the way he never ate, the fear she'd seen in people's eyes, the odd archaic way he sometimes spoke, like he'd learned English in another century. "You think I'm crazy," Diana said, reading her expression. "I know how it sounds, but deep down, you already suspect something's wrong, don't you?" You've noticed things that don't add up. You're a smart woman, Rose. Trust your instincts. Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying it is, what am I supposed to do? Just never see him again? Disappear without explanation? Rose heard the edge of hysteria in her own voice. I care about him. He's been nothing but kind to me. He's grooming you, Diana said bluntly, making you trust him, feel safe with him, so that when he finally decides to feed or turn you or whatever he's planning, you won't fight it. That's how they work. They're predators, Rose. Very sophisticated, very patient predators. But predators all the same. Rose stood up abruptly, shoving her laptop into her bag. I need to go. I need to think. Here, Diana held out a business card. My number. Call me if you need help getting away from him, or if you need proof. I have more, so much more. Just promise me you'll be careful. Don't let him isolate you. Don't go anywhere alone with him until you know for sure what he is. Rose took the card without looking at it and fled the coffee shop. Her heart was pounding, her mind a chaotic mess of denial and dawning horror. It couldn't be true. Vampires weren't real. Diana Cross was clearly disturbed, possibly dangerous, and Rose should probably warn Konstantin that someone was spreading insane rumors about him. But she couldn't shake the images from the photos. Konstantin's face in different eras, unchanging and unmistakable, or the way all the strange details suddenly clicked into place if she accepted the impossible explanation. She went home and did something she probably should have done weeks ago. She researched Konstantin Bathory, really researched him beyond the basic business information. What she found made her blood run cold. There were gaps in his history. No birth certificate on file, no record of him before 1952 in the United States, though business licenses and property deeds bearing his name stretched back to the early 1800s. No parents listed, no family members, no childhood friends or colleagues who could verify his past. It was like he'd simply appeared fully formed, wealthy and powerful, with no history to explain how he'd gotten there. And there were the disappearances Diana had mentioned. Rose found them with some digging articles about people who'd been seen with Konstantin or members of his household who'd later vanished. The articles were vague, carefully worded, but the pattern was there if you looked for it. Young people, mostly women, gone without a trace. The cases were never solved. Rose spent the day spiraling between disbelief and terror. By the time evening came and her phone buzzed with Konstantin's usual message, "May I see you tonight?" she'd worked herself into a state of near panic. She stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Can we talk? Something's come up." His response was immediate. "Of course, I'll send the car." She should have said no, should have insisted on meeting in public, in daylight, with people around. But part of her needed to see him, needed to look him in the eye and ask the impossible question. So she got in the car when it arrived and let Thomas drive her to the mansion, her heart hammering the entire way. Konstantin was waiting in the foyer, and the moment she saw him, her resolve wavered. He looked so genuinely happy to see her, his silver eyes lighting up and a warm smile spreading across his face. He moved toward her with his arms slightly outstretched, clearly intending to embrace her, but stopped when he saw her expression. "Rose, what's wrong? Are you a vampire?" The words came out in a rush, too loud in the elegant space. "Because a woman approached me today and told me you were. She showed me pictures of you from different time periods, all looking exactly the same. And I looked you up, really looked you up, and there are all these gaps and inconsistencies and people who disappeared after being connected to you. So I need you to tell me the truth. Are you a vampire?" The silence that followed was deafening. Konstantin stood frozen, his expression cycling through shock, resignation, and something that looked like grief. Finally, slowly, he nodded. "Yes, I am." Rose's knees went weak. She'd expected denial or laughter or some rational explanation that would make the crazy theory go away. She hadn't actually expected confirmation. "Oh my God, oh my God." "Please, let me explain." Konstantin moved toward her and she flinched back, which seemed to hurt him more than any physical blow could have. "Rose, I would never harm you. You have to believe that. Yes, I'm a vampire. Yes, I've lived for centuries. But everything else between us has been real. My feelings for you are real." "Your feelings?" Rose's voice was rising, hysteria creeping in. "You're a vampire. You drink blood. You've been what? Planning to make me your next meal? Was any of this real, or was I just being fattened up like a lamb for slaughter? No. The vehemence in his voice stopped her spiral. No, Rose, never. I haven't fed from a human in over 50 years. I survive on donated blood from hospitals, provided by humans who are aware of our existence and choose to help us. I would never take from you without your consent, and I certainly would never harm you. Why should I believe you? But even as she asked, she was thinking about the last 3 weeks. The gentleness, the respect, the way he'd never pushed her for anything, the genuine affection in his touch, the careful way he'd handled her. None of it had felt predatory. It had felt like someone falling in love, slowly and carefully, trying not to rush or overwhelm. Because you know me, Konstantin said quietly. Not the vampire part, perhaps, but the rest. You know that I've been honest with you about everything I could be honest about. You know that I've treated you with respect and care. You know that my feelings for you are genuine. He took a careful step closer, his hands raised like he was approaching a frightened animal. I should have told you sooner. I know that. I was being selfish, wanting more time before I scared you away, but I was planning to tell you soon, I swear. I couldn't keep letting you think I was human when these feelings between us were growing so intense. Rose wanted to run. Every survival instinct she had was screaming at her to get out, to put distance between herself and the creature standing before her. But she couldn't make her feet move. Because he was right, she did know him. And nothing he'd just revealed changed the way he'd made her feel safe, cherished, seen in a way no one else ever had. Show me, she said abruptly. If you're really a vampire, show me. Prove it. Konstantin hesitated, clearly uncertain. Are you sure? It might frighten you. I'm already frightened. Show me. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they'd changed. The silver intensified, seeming to glow with internal light. His fangs emerged, longer and sharper than human canines, designed for piercing and feeding. His already pale skin seemed to become translucent, showing the lack of blood flow beneath. He looked otherworldly, beautiful and terrible at once. Rose's breath caught. She should have been repulsed, should have been terrified, but instead she found herself thinking that he looked like himself, just more so. Like this was the truth of him, the reality beneath the human mask he wore for the world. Does it hurt? She asked, surprising herself. The fangs, I mean. When they come out. Konstantin's eyes widened slightly, like that wasn't the question he'd expected. No, it feels natural, like flexing a muscle. He retracted them as she watched, his eyes fading back to their normal silver, and his skin regaining what little color it had. You're not running. I should be. Rose wrapped her arms around herself, trying to process. Everything I've ever learned says I should be running screaming. But I'm not. Why am I not? Because you're extraordinarily brave, Konstantin said softly, and because some part of you trusts that I won't hurt you. You'd be right to trust that, Rose. I would destroy myself before I let any harm come to you. The woman who warned me said people disappear around you. She said humans who get involved with vampires end up dead or worse. Konstantin's expression darkened. Diana Cross, I assume. I heard she'd been watching my movements. He sighed heavily. Her sister's death was a tragedy, but it wasn't one of mine who killed her. There are others, vampires who don't share my views on human life, who see your kind as food and nothing more. I've been trying to control them for decades, enforce laws within our community about hunting and feeding, but I can't prevent every death. So vampires are real, and some of them are murdering people, and you're what Vampire King trying to keep them in line? Rose heard the edge of hysterical laughter in her voice. Essentially, yes. Konstantin moved to a chair and sat down heavily, suddenly looking very tired. I rule what's called the court in this city. I make laws, enforce boundaries, try to maintain peace between vampires and the few humans who know we exist. It's exhausting and often thankless, and I fail more often than I succeed. But I try. Rose found herself sitting down too, her legs finally giving out. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of revelations hanging between them. Why me? She finally asked. Out of all the humans in this city, all the people you must encounter, why did you pursue me? I'm nobody special. You're wrong about that. Konstantin leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his silver eyes intense. Do you know what it's like to live for centuries, Rose? To watch everyone you care about age and die while you remain unchanged? To become so disconnected from humanity that you forget what it feels like to be surprised or delighted or truly happy? He shook his head slowly. I'd been going through the motions for so long, existing but not really living. And then you dumped soup on me and looked at me with such genuine mortification and kindness that something in me woke up. You made me feel human again, made me remember why I've spent so long trying to protect humanity instead of simply dominating it, like so many of my kind believe we should. That's a lot of pressure to put on a clumsy waitress, Rose said weakly. I'm not asking you to save me or fix me or be responsible for my happiness. I'm just trying to explain why I couldn't let you go, why I had to know you. He stood and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. I'm in love with you, Rose. Completely, irrevocably in love with you. And I know that's terrifying and probably too much too soon, especially now that you know what I am. But it's the truth. You've brought light back into a life that had been dark for far too long. Rose felt tears sliding down her cheeks, though she couldn't have said if they were from fear or confusion or the overwhelming emotion of hearing those words from him. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to process any of this. Then don't. Not yet. Konstantin reached up slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. His skin was still cold, but his touch was infinitely careful. Go home. Think about everything. Take all the time you need. If you decide this is too much, if you can't be with someone like me, I'll understand. I'll be devastated, but I'll understand, and I'll make sure you're safe, that no other vampire ever bothers you. And if I decide I want to try, Rose asked quietly, if I'm insane enough to want to be with you despite everything? His face transformed, hope and joy chasing away the resignation. Then I will spend every day proving I'm worthy of that trust. I'll answer every question, show you my world, keep you safe from every danger in it. I'll court you properly, the way I should have from the beginning, with complete honesty. Rose nodded slowly, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. I need to go. I need to sleep and think and probably have a breakdown in private. Of course. He stood and helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. Thomas will take you home. And Rose, thank you for listening. Thank you for not running the moment I confirmed your suspicions. It means more than you know. The car ride home passed in a blur. Rose stumbled into her apartment and collapsed on her bed still fully clothed, her mind spinning. Vampires were real. Konstantin was a vampire king, apparently, who ruled other vampires and tried to keep them from killing people. And he was in love with her. It was absurd, impossible, insane. And yet, Rose closed her eyes and thought about the last 3 weeks, the way Konstantin looked at her like she was precious, the gentle touches, the long conversations, the way he seemed genuinely interested in everything about her, the safety she felt in his presence, despite all the logical reasons she should have been afraid, the way her heart raced when she saw him, the way she'd started counting down hours until they could be together again. She was falling in love with him too, had probably been falling in love with him since that first night when he'd laughed at her disaster instead of getting angry. The vampire revelation should have changed that, should have made those feelings evaporate in the face of supernatural danger. But it didn't. If anything, knowing the truth made her feelings stronger, because he'd been honest when he could have kept lying. He'd shown her his true face, literally, and trusted her not to run. He'd put himself in her hands, made himself vulnerable, despite being an ancient creature of immense power. Rose fell asleep with tears still wet on her cheeks, but they weren't tears of fear. She didn't call or text for 3 days. She went to work, came home, and sat with her thoughts. She researched vampires obsessively, reading everything from folklore to modern theories. She even called Diana Cross and asked her more questions, listening to the woman's warnings with a more open mind than before. But she also thought about Konstantin, about the way he'd looked when she'd flinched away from him like she'd wounded him mortally, about the care he'd taken to never push her, never demand more than she was ready to give, about his confession that she'd made him feel human again. On the fourth day, she finally picked up her phone. "Can I see you tonight?" she texted. The response came within seconds. "Yes, always yes. Same time?" "Yes." She dressed carefully that evening, taking more time than usual. She wasn't sure what she was going to say, what decision she'd made. She only knew she needed to see him, needed to look into those silver eyes and let her heart guide her instead of her head. Thomas picked her up as usual, and the familiar drive to the mansion felt like coming home. Konstantin was waiting on the steps this time, unable to maintain his usual composure. He looked anxious, uncertain, more human than she'd ever seen him, despite knowing now that he was anything but. Rose. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "Thank you for coming. I had to see you." She climbed the steps slowly, stopping when she was close enough to touch. "I've spent 3 days thinking about everything. About what you are, what that means, the danger inherent in your world. I talked to Diana Cross. She told me horror stories about vampires and gave me a whole list of reasons why I should never see you again." Konstantin's expression grew more guarded with each word. And she's not wrong about a lot of it. Your world is dangerous. There are vampires out there who would see me as nothing but food. Getting involved with you puts me at risk in ways I never had to worry about before. Rose took a breath, then reached up and cupped his cold face in her warm hand. "But I don't care. I'm in love with you too, Konstantin. I think I have been since that first night, and I'd rather have whatever time we can have together, however complicated and dangerous it might be, than spend the rest of my life wondering what if." For a moment, he just stared at her like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then he was kissing her, his cold lips moving against hers with a desperate tenderness that made her knees weak. His arms came around her, pulling her close, but still careful, always careful not to hurt her with his superior strength. Rose melted into him, her hands sliding into his white hair, kissing him back with all the emotion she'd been holding in for days. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, though she suspected only she actually needed the air, Konstantin pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I will keep you safe, Rose. I swear it on my very existence. Nothing will harm you while I live. I believe you." And she did. Against all logic and reason, she trusted him completely. They went inside, but this time Konstantin led her not to the dining room, but to a more intimate sitting room she hadn't seen before. A fire burned in the fireplace despite the warm evening, casting dancing shadows on the walls. They settled on a sofa together, Rose tucked against his side with his arm around her shoulders. "I need to tell you everything," Konstantin said, "about what I am, about my world, about the dangers you need to be aware of. No more secrets." So he told her. About being turned in 1743 by a vampire lord who'd seen potential in a young Hungarian nobleman. About the early years of bloodlust and violence before he'd learned control. About watching his human family age and die while he remained unchanged. About the centuries that followed, drifting through Europe and eventually to America, accumulating wealth and power and emptiness. He told her about vampire society, the courts that ruled different territories, the complex politics and ancient feuds, the laws that governed feeding and turning and interaction with humans. He explained that most humans never knew vampires existed, because vampires who drew attention were swiftly eliminated by their own kind. Secrecy was survival. He told her about the threats in his own territory, vampires who resented his strict laws about hunting humans, who wanted to return to the old ways of treating humanity as nothing but livestock. Vampires from other territories who thought him weak for his protection of humans and might try to use Rose against him. Human hunters like Diana Cross who knew vampires existed and wanted to eradicate them all. "I won't lie to you and say there's no danger," Konstantin said seriously. "Being with me makes you a target in ways you wouldn't be otherwise. I can protect you, and I will, but I can't guarantee your absolute safety, not in this world." "No one can guarantee absolute safety in any world," Rose pointed out. "I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. At least this way I'd be spending my time with someone I love." "You're remarkably calm about all this." "I'm really not. Inside, I'm screaming. But I've learned that sometimes you have to just jump and trust you'll figure out how to fly on the way down." She twisted to look up at him. "Besides, you're worth the risk. Everything I've learned about you, all of it, not just the scary parts, tells me you're someone worth keeping." Konstantin kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You laughed when I dumped soup on you. That was pretty much it." They spent the rest of the evening talking, Konstantin answering every question she could think of about vampires and his life. Yes, sunlight would kill him, or at least cause severe burns and weakness. No, he didn't sleep in a coffin. He didn't sleep much at all, actually, though he could if he chose. Yes, crosses and holy water were nonsense, though silver could hurt him. No, he couldn't turn into a bat, but he could move with supernatural speed and had strength far beyond any human. "Can you read minds?" Rose asked. "Not exactly. I can sometimes sense strong emotions, and I'm very good at reading body language after centuries of practice, but your actual thoughts remain your own." "What about turning humans, making more vampires?" Konstantin's expression grew serious. "It's possible, but dangerous, and rarely done. The vampire has to drain the human almost to death, then have them drink vampire blood. Most don't survive the transformation. Those who do are often mad for the first few years, unable to control the bloodlust. I haven't turned anyone in over a century. I won't do it again unless someone is dying and explicitly asks for it as a last resort." Rose absorbed that, trying not to think too hard about the implications. "Do you want to turn me?" "No." The answer was immediate and emphatic. "Rose, you're perfect as you are, warm and alive and human. I don't want to change that. I just want to be with you for as long as you'll have me." The unsaid words hung between them. For as long as you live. Rose was mortal. Konstantin was not. Eventually, she would age and die while he remained unchanged. It was an inevitable tragedy built into their relationship from the start. But Rose pushed that thought away. They would deal with that when the time came. For now, she just wanted to be with him. Over the following weeks, Rose was gradually introduced to Konstantin's world. He took her to the court, a vast underground complex beneath one of his office buildings where vampires gathered to socialize and conduct business. She met other vampires, some friendly and curious about the human who'd captured their king's heart, others cold and dismissive. She learned to identify vampires by sight, the pale skin, the stillness, the way they moved just slightly wrong for humans. She met Konstantin's inner circle, Dmitri, his second in command, who'd been turned in the 1600s and served as enforcer of court law. Katerina, a vampire who managed Konstantin's business interests and had a sharp wit that Rose immediately appreciated. And Lucian, the youngest of the group at barely 100 years old, who seemed delighted that Konstantin had finally found someone. "He's been alone for so long," Lucian told her one evening when Konstantin was in a meeting. "Disconnected from everything. I've never seen him like this, actually happy. Whatever you're doing, please keep doing it." Rose also learned about the threats. There had been 3 attacks on humans in the past month, all attributed to a group of rogue vampires who rejected Konstantin's authority. Dmitri was hunting them, but they were clever and stayed hidden. Diana Cross had been spotted near court territory, presumably trying to gather information for her vendetta. And there were rumors of a vampire lord from the East Coast planning to visit, possibly to challenge Konstantin's rule or form an alliance. No one was quite sure. Through it all, Konstantin was attentive and protective without being smothering. He made sure Rose knew how to contact him at any time, gave her a phone that connected directly to his security team, taught her basic self-defense against vampire attacks. But he also respected her independence, didn't try to control her movements or dictate how she lived her life. Their relationship deepened. Rose stayed over at the mansion more and more often until she was basically living there despite keeping her apartment. They talked for hours every night, shared interests and fears and dreams. Konstantin was endlessly fascinated by her modern perspective on the world, while Rose loved hearing his stories from centuries past. He was there for her when she had nightmares about her mother, holding her and murmuring comfort in languages she didn't understand until she fell back asleep. She was there for him when the weight of ruling the court grew heavy, reminding him why he fought so hard to protect humanity. And the physical side of their relationship grew too. Konstantin was always careful, aware of his strength and his nature, but Rose learned to trust him completely. to kiss him without fear of his fangs, to pull him close without worrying he might hurt her. He worshipped her body with a reverence that made her feel like a goddess, taking his time to learn every sound she made, every touch that made her gasp. It was perfect. It was terrifying. It was everything Rose had never known she wanted. Then, 2 months into their relationship, everything fell apart. Rose was walking home from a shift at Nocturne. She'd kept the job despite Konstantin's offers to support her, needing the independence when someone grabbed her from behind. A hand clamped over her mouth before she could scream, and she was dragged into an alley with supernatural speed. Her attacker spun her around, and Rose found herself face to face with a vampire she didn't recognize. Male, ancient-looking despite the ageless face, with eyes that gleamed red in the darkness. "The human pet of Konstantin Bathory," he said, his accent thick and Eastern European. "How fortunate. He'll come for you, and when he does, I'll finally put an end to his miserable reign." Rose tried to scream, tried to fight, but his grip was iron. She felt his fangs pierce her neck, felt the horrifying pull as he began to feed. The phone in her pocket, the one Konstantin had given her, was unreachable. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. "This is it," she thought distantly. "This is how I die." Then her attacker was gone, ripped away from her with such force she heard bones crack. Rose collapsed against the alley wall, her hand going to her bleeding neck. Through blurring vision, she saw Konstantin. But not the Konstantin she knew. This was the vampire, fully unleashed, eyes blazing silver fire, fangs bared, moving with speed that made him nearly invisible. He was terrifying and magnificent. The fight was brief and brutal. The other vampire was old and strong, but Konstantin was older and stronger. Within moments, he had his attacker pinned to the ground, one hand around his throat. "You dare," Konstantin snarled, his voice barely recognizable. "You dare touch her. You dare feed from her." "She's just a human," the vampire choked out. "Food, prey. Treating her as anything else makes you weak." "She is mine," the words came out as a growl, "and you will die for touching her." Rose tried to speak, to call Konstantin's name, but no sound came out. She watched as he ended the other vampire's life with swift, terrible efficiency. Then he was at her side, gathering her carefully into his arms. "Rose, Rose, stay with me. I've got you. You're safe now." "Konstantin." His name was barely a whisper. She could feel the blood still flowing from her neck, soaking into her shirt. "I'm sorry. I should have been more careful." "Shh, no, this isn't your fault. Never your fault." He was moving now, carrying her with supernatural speed through the streets. People scattered out of his way, probably seeing nothing but a blur. "Stay awake, Rose. Please stay awake." "Tired," she mumbled. "So tired." They reached the mansion in what felt like seconds. Konstantin carried her inside, shouting for Katerina. The female vampire appeared instantly, took one look at Rose and went pale. "Hospital?" she asked. "No time. She's lost too much blood. I need to kid her." Konstantin cut himself off, his jaw clenching. "I need to give her my blood, just enough to heal the wound and replace what she's lost, not enough to turn her." "Konstantin, the risk—" "I know the risk," his voice was raw. "But if I don't, she'll die. Get Dmitri and Lucian here now. I need them to stop me if I can't control myself." Rose barely understood what was happening. She felt Konstantin bite his own wrist, felt him press it to her lips. "Drink, Rose, please. Just a little. It will heal you." The blood was cold and tasted like metal, and something else, something indefinable. But she drank because he asked her to, because she trusted him even as darkness pulled at her. The effect was immediate. Warmth spread through her body, the pain in her neck fading. Strength returned in a rush, pushing back the darkness. "Enough," she heard Dmitri say. "Konstantin, that's enough. She's healed. Let go." Rose felt Konstantin pull away, heard him make a sound like a wounded animal. When her vision cleared, she saw him across the room, Lucian and Dmitri holding him back. His eyes were wild, fangs fully extended, his entire body trembling with the effort of control. "I'm okay," Rose said, her voice stronger now. "Konstantin, I'm okay. You saved me." He was breathing hard, unnecessary air moving through undead lungs purely from emotion. I could have killed you. Could have drained you trying to save you. I almost couldn't stop. But you did stop. Rose stood on shaking legs, ignoring Katerina's attempts to keep her seated. She walked toward Konstantin, and Dmitri and Lucian reluctantly let her through. When she was close enough, she reached up and cupped his face again, making him look at her. You stopped because you love me, because you have control. I trust you, Konstantin. Slowly, the wildness faded from his eyes. His fangs retracted. His breathing evened out. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have protected you better, should have made sure you were never alone, should have... Stop. Rose pushed back enough to look at him. This wasn't your fault. Some vampire decided to use me to get to you. That's on him, not you. And you saved me. You got there in time and you saved me. But I almost lost you. But you didn't. I'm right here. I'm alive and safe and still very much in love with you, you dramatic vampire king. That surprised a watery laugh out of him. Dramatic? Extremely. It's kind of part of your charm. He kissed her then, gentle and desperate and grateful. Around them, his inner circle quietly left the room, giving them privacy. When they finally broke apart, Konstantin kept his arms around her, like he couldn't bear to let go. We need to increase security. I need to know where you are at all times. You can't be alone anymore, Rose. It's too dangerous. That seems excessive. A vampire just tried to kill you to get to me. Excessive is the appropriate response. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Please, Rose, let me protect you. Let me make sure this never happens again. Looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine fear there, Rose couldn't argue. Okay, but I'm not giving up my job or my independence. We find a compromise that keeps me safe without making me a prisoner. Agreed. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I love you. I can't lose you. You've become my entire world, Rose. I love you too, and you're not getting rid of me that easily. The attack had consequences. Konstantin discovered that the vampire who'd attacked Rose was part of a larger plot, a group of traditionalist vampires who wanted to overthrow his rule and return to the old ways of openly hunting humans. They saw his relationship with Rose as proof of his weakness, his unsuitability to lead. For the next 2 weeks, the court was on high alert. Konstantin barely slept, spending his nights hunting down the conspirators with Dmitri. Rose was assigned a constant guard, Lucian, who proved to be surprisingly good company. She continued working at Nocturne, but with security presence that made Marcus's eyes bug out. I feel like I'm dating the mob, Rose told Konstantin after a particularly tense day. Vampire King is arguably more dangerous than mob boss, he replied without humor. He looked exhausted, a feat for someone who didn't technically need sleep. We're getting close. Dmitri has tracked the conspirators to a location outside the city. Tomorrow night, we end this. Let me come with you. Absolutely not. Konstantin, they're targeting me anyway, at least if I'm there. No, Rose, his voice was hard. I will not bring you into the line of fire. You stay here where you're safe and I will handle this. They argued about it, but Konstantin was immovable. When he left the next evening with Dmitri and half his enforcers, Rose was left behind with strict orders to stay in the mansion under Lucian's protection. She lasted approximately 2 hours before her anxiety became unbearable. I can't just sit here, she told Lucian, pacing the sitting room. What if something goes wrong? What if he needs help? Konstantin can handle himself. He's one of the oldest and most powerful vampires in North America. But Lucian looked worried too. Though I admit, I don't like being left behind either. Rose made a decision. Take me there. What? No, Konstantin will kill me. Only if something goes wrong. Look, I'm not saying we get involved in the fight, but we can at least be close by. Please, Lucian. I need to be there. She could see him wavering. Finally, he cursed in what sounded like Italian and grabbed his car keys. Fine, but we stay in the car at a safe distance, and if things go bad, we leave immediately. Agreed? Agreed. The drive took 40 minutes. Lucian parked on a hilltop overlooking an abandoned warehouse where apparently the confrontation was taking place. Even from this distance, Rose could see flashes of movement, hear sounds of violence. Her hands clenched into fists, every instinct screaming at her to do something, help somehow. "There are too many," Lucian muttered, pulling out his phone. "Konstantin said it was a small group, but I count at least 15 down there. This is a trap." He was calling for backup when Rose saw at a flash of white hair Konstantin, surrounded by enemies. He was fighting brilliantly, but he was outnumbered. As she watched, one of the vampires got past his guard and drove a blade into his side. Rose screamed. She was out of the car and running before Lucian could stop her, sprinting down the hill toward the warehouse with no plan beyond getting to Konstantin. She heard Lucian curse behind her, heard him following. The warehouse was chaos. Vampires fighting each other with supernatural speed and strength, the air filled with snarls and the sound of breaking bones. Rose skidded to a halt, suddenly realizing how stupid this was. She was human, fragile, completely useless in a vampire fight. She was going to get killed, and probably get Konstantin killed trying to protect her. Then she saw him. Konstantin, bleeding from multiple wounds, still fighting, but clearly weakening. The vampire who'd stabbed him was moving in for another strike, and Konstantin didn't see him coming. Without thinking, Rose grabbed a piece of broken wood from the ground. It had a sharp point, almost stake-like, and ran forward. She couldn't match vampire speed, but she could be unpredictable. She threw herself at the vampire, attacking Konstantin, driving the improvised stake toward his chest. She missed his heart, but she hit something important, because he screamed and staggered back. It gave Konstantin the opening he needed. He spun and ended the threat with brutal efficiency. Then his eyes found Rose. "What are you doing here?" he roared over the sounds of battle. "I told you to stay safe." "Saving your life, apparently," she yelled back. She saw his expression change, saw fear flash across his face. "Behind you!" Rose turned. A vampire was lunging for her, fangs bared. She knew she couldn't move fast enough to avoid him. This was it. She'd made her choice, and now she'd pay for it. But Konstantin was there, putting himself between her and the attacker. The vampire's fangs meant for her throat sank into Konstantin's shoulder instead. Konstantin made a sound of pain but didn't stop, wrapping his arms around the attacker and snapping his neck with one brutal twist. Then Dmitri was there, and more enforcers, the backup Lucian had called. The tide of battle shifted quickly. The conspirators were outnumbered now, overwhelmed. Within minutes, it was over. Konstantin turned to Rose, and the look on his face made her stomach drop. "You could have died. You could have been killed, Rose. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking you needed help. I was thinking I couldn't sit safely in a mansion while you might be dying." She reached for him, but he stepped back. "Konstantin, you don't understand. I can't protect you if you keep putting yourself in danger. I can't lose you, Rose. I won't survive it." His voice broke. "Please. Please promise me you'll never do something like this again." "I can't promise that." Rose's own voice was shaking now. "Because if you're in danger, I will always try to help. That's what love means, Konstantin. I'm not going to sit on the sidelines while you risk everything." They stared at each other, the distance between them feeling like miles. Finally, Konstantin closed the gap and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it almost hurt. "You're going to be the death of me," he muttered into her hair. "And I'm already dead." "Technically undead," Rose said, and felt him laugh despite everything. They went home together, Konstantin's wounds already healing thanks to vampire physiology. The conspiracy was broken, the ringleaders eliminated or captured. The court was safe. More importantly, Rose was safe. But the incident had exposed a fundamental tension in their relationship. Konstantin's need to protect her warred with Rose's refusal to be protected at the expense of his safety. They fought about it over the next few days, long arguments that went in circles. "I've lived for centuries," Konstantin said during one particularly heated discussion. "You're human, fragile. Your life is precious and finite. Can't you see why I need to keep you safe? And can't you see that my life doesn't mean anything if I lose you?" Rose shot back. "I'm not going to spend whatever time we have together wrapped in bubble wrap, Konstantin. I'm going to live. That includes taking risks sometimes, especially for the people I love." They reached an uneasy truce. Konstantin agreed to stop trying to lock her away for her own safety. Rose agreed to be more careful and accept reasonable security measures. Neither was entirely happy with the compromise, but they both loved each other too much to let the disagreement tear them apart. Life slowly returned to normal, or what passed for normal in their circumstances. Rose officially moved into the mansion, finally giving up her studio apartment. She met more of the vampire community, became a familiar presence at court gatherings. Some vampires resented her influence on their king, but most accepted her. Some even grew to like her. She also reconnected with Diana Cross, much to Konstantin's displeasure. But Rose felt she needed to maintain that connection to remember the human perspective on vampires. Diana was wary at first, certain Rose was under some kind of supernatural influence, but gradually came to accept that Rose's feelings for Konstantin were genuine. "I still think you're crazy," Diana said over coffee one afternoon, "but I can't deny that he treats you well. Better than most human men treat their partners, frankly. Just promise me that if things ever change, if he ever becomes a threat, you'll call me." "I promise," Rose said, though she couldn't imagine it ever coming to that. 6 months into their relationship, Konstantin asked Rose to make a decision. They were in his private chambers. She'd taken to thinking of them as their chambers, lying together on his massive bed. He didn't sleep much, but he liked to hold her while she slept, watching over her through the night. Tonight, though, they were both awake, talking quietly in the darkness. "I need to know what you want for the future," Konstantin said carefully. "I've been avoiding this conversation because I'm afraid of the answer, but it's not fair to you to keep dancing around it." Rose's heart started to race. She knew what he was asking. "You mean about turning me?" "Yes." He shifted to face her, his silver eyes luminous in the dark. "Rose, you're aging. Not noticeably yet, but you will. In 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, you'll grow old while I remain the same. Eventually, you'll die, and I'll be alone again. I've been trying to accept that, to be grateful for whatever time we have, but I can't stop thinking about the alternative. You want to turn me into a vampire. I want you to have a choice." He took her hand, his fingers cold against hers. "I will never turn you without your consent. If you want to live out your natural life as a human, I'll cherish every moment we have together and accept the end when it comes. But if you want to stay with me, truly stay with me forever, the option exists. I can turn you. You could become like me. We could have eternity together instead of decades." Rose had known this conversation was coming. She'd been thinking about it herself, lying awake at night trying to imagine different futures. A human life, aging while Konstantin stayed young, maybe 40 or 50 years together before death separated them. Or an immortal life, becoming a vampire, giving up her humanity but gaining forever with the man she loved. "What do you want?" she asked. "If you could choose, what would you want?" "I want you safe and happy," Konstantin said immediately. "That's my only desire. But if I'm being selfish, if I'm admitting my deepest wish, I want forever with you, Rose. I want centuries to love you, to explore the world with you, to never have to face the pain of losing you. But being a vampire isn't easy. You've told me that. The bloodlust, the disconnect from humanity, watching everyone you knew die. Are you sure you want that for me?" "No," he admitted. "Part of me wants to keep you exactly as you are, warm and human and alive. But the larger part of me, the selfish part, wants you with me always. I know I shouldn't want that. I know I should be noble and encourage you to live your human life. But I'm not that noble, Rose. I'm a monster who's found something precious, and I don't want to let it go." Rose was quiet for a long time, thinking. She'd spent months in the vampire world now. She knew what she'd be giving up: sunlight, normal food, human experiences. She'd have to fake her death, leave behind any human connections she still had. She'd have to feed on blood, navigate vampire politics, live in the shadows of human society. But she'd also gained so much. Time with Konstantin, not just decades, but centuries. The chance to really know him, to explore the world together, to build a life that wasn't overshadowed by the ticking clock of her mortality. Strength, power, the ability to stand beside him as an equal rather than a fragile human he had to constantly protect. And she loved him. God, she loved him so much it physically ached sometimes. The thought of leaving him, even decades from now, felt unbearable. "I want to think about it," she said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make on the spot, but I'm not saying no, Konstantin. I'm just saying I need time to really consider what I'd be giving up and what I'd be gaining. Take all the time you need, he said, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. I'll love you and wait for your decision for as long as it takes. Rose spent the next few weeks seriously considering her options. She talked to other vampires about their transformations, what they'd gained and lost. Katerina told her that becoming a vampire had freed her from the constraints placed on women in her era, given her power and agency she never could have had as a human. Lucian admitted that he missed sunlight and human food, but couldn't imagine going back. She also talked to Diana, who predictably told her it would be a terrible mistake. You're thinking with your heart instead of your head. You're so in love you can't see clearly. But Rose, this is your life, your humanity. Once you give that up, you can never get it back. But what kind of life would I have without him? Rose asked. I'm not saying I can't live without Konstantin. I could. But would I want to? Would I ever find anything or anyone that makes me feel the way he does? I don't think so, Deanna. I think he's it for me. And if that's true, then doesn't it make sense to stay with him? You're so young, Diana said sadly. You have so much life ahead of you, so many experiences you haven't had yet. Are you ready to give all that up? Rose didn't have an answer to that, but she kept thinking about it, weighing her options, trying to imagine different futures. The decision finally crystallized one evening at court. Rose was standing beside Konstantin's throne. He'd had a smaller chair placed beside it for her, watching him arbitrate a dispute between two vampire factions. He was magnificent in his element, commanding and fair, listening carefully to both sides before rendering judgment. This was the Konstantin most of the vampire world saw, the king, powerful and decisive. But then he glanced at her, just a quick look, and his expression softened, his eyes warmed. For just a moment, he was only her Konstantin, the man who laughed at soup disasters and held her while she slept and looked at her like she was his entire world. In that moment, Rose knew. She didn't want this to be temporary. She wanted to stand beside him not just for decades, but for centuries. She wanted to be his partner in every sense, not just the human he protected, but his equal in power and longevity. She wanted forever. After the court session ended, she asked him to take her somewhere private. They went to the mansion's library, one of her favorite rooms with its floor-to-ceiling shelves and comfortable reading nooks. I've made my decision, she said without preamble. About turning. Konstantin went very still. And? I want you to turn me. Rose took his hands, looking up into his silver eyes. I want forever with you, Konstantin. I want centuries to love you. I want to stand beside you as your equal, your partner in every way. I'm ready to become a vampire. She saw hope and fear war in his expression. Rose, are you certain? This isn't something you can undo. Once you're turned, there's no going back to humanity. I'm certain. I've thought about nothing else for weeks. I've weighed the costs and benefits, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. Life without you isn't worth as much as life with you. I choose you, Konstantin. I choose us. I choose forever. He kissed her then, deep and passionate and grateful. When they broke apart, he was smiling, really smiling in a way she rarely saw. When? He asked. There's no rush. We can wait until you're ready, until... Soon, Rose interrupted. I don't want to wait. The longer I think about it, the more anxious I'll get. Let's do this, Konstantin. Turn me. Make me yours in every way. They decided to wait a week, to give Rose time to settle her human affairs. She quit her job at Nocturne, telling Marcus she was moving abroad for an unexpected opportunity. She called the few friends she'd made in the city and said her goodbyes, making excuses for why she'd be out of touch. She even called Diana one last time. I'm doing it, she told the hunter. I'm letting Konstantin turn me. There was a long silence on the other end. I can't support this decision, Rose, but I respect your right to make it. Just be careful. And if some part of you survives the transformation, if you remember who you were as a human, maybe you can use your position to help protect other humans from the vampires who aren't like Konstantin. I will, Rose promised. I won't forget what it was like to be human, Diana. I'll carry that with me into whatever comes next. The night of her transformation, Rose was surprisingly calm. She'd expected to be terrified, but instead she felt peaceful, certain she was making the right choice. Konstantin, by contrast, was a wreck. His hands shook as he held her, his eyes haunted. "I've never turned someone I loved before," he admitted. "I'm terrified I'll lose control, that I'll take too much or not give enough, that you won't survive the transformation, or that you will survive but won't be you anymore." "I trust you," Rose said firmly. "I trust you completely, Konstantin. You won't hurt me. You'll give me exactly what I need, and I'll come back to you. I promise." They were in his chambers, private and secure. Dmitri and Katerina waited outside in case anything went wrong. Konstantin had explained the process. He would drain her nearly to death, then feed her his blood. If all went well, she would die, and then wake transformed, reborn as a vampire. If things went wrong, she simply wouldn't wake up. "I love you," Konstantin said, positioning them on the bed so he could hold her comfortably. "Whatever happens, remember that I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my very long existence." "I love you too," Rose replied. "Now stop stalling and make me immortal." He laughed, a shaky sound, and kissed her one more time. Then his fangs descended, and he bit into her neck. The sensation was strange pain at first, sharp and shocking, but then something else. A pull, a draining feeling, but not entirely unpleasant. Rose felt herself getting weaker, her heartbeat slowing, darkness creeping in at the edges. She kept her eyes on Konstantin's face, watching the concentration there, the careful control. Just when she thought she couldn't take any more, when she was sure she was about to slip away entirely, he stopped. He bit his own wrist and pressed it to her lips. "Drink, my love. Come back to me." Rose drank. The blood was cold and strange, but somehow right, filling her with power even as her body shut down. She felt her heart give one last beat, then another, then stop entirely. Then there was nothing. Rose woke to a world transformed. Everything was sharper, clearer, more vivid than she'd ever experienced. She could hear Konstantin's unnecessary breathing beside her, hear Dmitri and Katerina talking in low voices outside the door, hear the scurrying of mice in the walls. She could smell everything, the lingering scent of her own human blood, the ancient smell of vampire that clung to Konstantin, the leather of the furniture, the dust in the corners. And she was thirsty. God, she was so thirsty. Her throat burned with need, her new fangs descending automatically. "Rose," Konstantin's voice was cautious, hopeful. "Can you hear me?" She turned to look at him, and suddenly she could see why vampires found humans so irresistible. She could hear his heart. No, wait, he didn't have a heartbeat. But she could sense the blood he'd consumed earlier, hear it moving through his system. Even knowing it was Konstantin, the love of her life, part of her new vampire instincts, screamed at her to feed. "Thirsty," she managed to say, her voice rough. "Konstantin, I'm so thirsty." "I know, I have blood for you. Donated blood, not from a human directly." He helped her sit up, moving slowly and carefully. "Your control will be very low at first. You'll need to feed frequently for the first few weeks, until you learn to manage the hunger." He brought her a glass of blood. She would never have thought she'd see such a thing, and Rose drank it down in seconds. It helped. The burning in her throat eased slightly. The screaming instincts quieted a bit, but she was still hungry. "More?" she asked. "As much as you need." Konstantin watched her drink 3 more glasses before the hunger faded to manageable levels. "How do you feel? Are you still you?" Rose took stock of herself. Her body felt different, stronger, faster, everything heightened, but her mind felt clear. She remembered everything, her human life, her mother, meeting Konstantin, falling in love, making the choice to transform. She was still Rose, just more. "I'm still me," she said, and watched relief flood his face. "Changed, but still me. Still your Rose." She reached for him, and he caught her in his arms, holding her tightly. "We did it. We actually did it." "You did it," he corrected. "You were so brave, Rose. You are so brave." The first few weeks of her new existence were challenging. Rose had to learn to control her enhanced strength, her supernatural speed, her heightened senses. She accidentally broke a dozen glasses before she learned to moderate her grip. She moved so fast she crashed into walls. The smells and sounds of the city were overwhelming until Katerina taught her how to filter and focus, and the bloodlust was constant, requiring her to feed multiple times a day. Konstantin stayed close, helping her through every step. He taught her to hunt. They went after criminals together, people who wouldn't be missed, taking just enough to survive without killing. He taught her to fight, to use her new speed and strength effectively. He introduced her formally to the court as his partner, his equal, and made it clear that she was to be treated with the same respect as him. Not everyone was happy about it. Some vampires grumbled about a newly turned vampire being elevated to such status. Others were outright hostile, seeing her as evidence of Konstantin's continued weakness regarding humans. But most accepted her, especially after she proved herself in a challenge against a vampire who questioned her right to stand beside the king. She won. It wasn't easy. Her opponent was older and more experienced, but Rose was faster and more ruthless. She'd spent months watching Konstantin fight, learning from him, and she was fighting for her place beside the man she loved. That gave her an edge her opponent lacked. After that, the dissent quieted. Rose was accepted as Konstantin's partner, as a power in the court in her own right. Together, they ruled the vampire community of the city, enforcing the laws that protected both vampires and humans, maintaining the delicate balance between the species. Rose also maintained her friendship with Diana Cross, much to everyone's surprise. She met with the hunter regularly, sharing information about vampire movements and helping protect humans from the less scrupulous members of her new species. Diana remained wary, but came to trust that Rose hadn't lost her humanity despite losing her human life. "You're different from other vampires," Diana admitted one evening. "You still care about humans, still see them as people rather than food. I didn't think that was possible." "Konstantin taught me that," Rose said. "He spent centuries holding on to his humanity, remembering why human life is precious. I'm just following his example." Years passed, then decades. Rose adapted fully to vampire life, grew into her power, became a fixture of the court. She and Konstantin traveled the world together, exploring the places he'd been and the places she'd dreamed of seeing. They faced challenges: rogue vampires, human hunters, political intrigue from other courts, but they faced them together, equal partners in every way. And through it all, their love deepened. Rose had thought she'd loved Konstantin as a human, but that was nothing compared to what she felt now. They had time, infinite time, to know each other, to grow together, to build a life that was rich and full despite its supernatural elements. Every night, Rose fell asleep in his arms, grateful for the choice she'd made. Every evening when she woke, she was glad to have forever with him. 50 years after her transformation, they stood together on the balcony of the mansion, looking out over the city they protected. Konstantin wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Choosing this life? Giving up your humanity?" Rose thought about it, really considered the question. She thought about sunlight, which she hadn't seen in 5 decades, about human food, which no longer appealed to her, about the normal life she might have had, the children she might have raised, the ordinary joys she'd sacrificed. Then she thought about the centuries ahead, all the time she'd have with Konstantin, the adventures they'd share, the love they'd continue to build, the eternity they'd been given. "No," she said firmly, turning in his arms to face him. "I don't regret it for a second. You're my forever, Konstantin. You were from the moment you laughed instead of yelling when I dumped soup on you. This life, this existence, it's everything I could have wanted because I'm living it with you." He kissed her, soft and sweet, and full of a love that had endured 50 years and would endure for centuries more. "I love you, Rose Bathory." "I love you too," she replied, smiling at the name she'd taken. "My vampire king." They stood together in the moonlight, two immortal beings who'd found something impossibly rare: eternal love. And as the city sparkled below them, full of humans going about their ordinary lives, Rose thought about the nervous waitress she'd been all those years ago. That girl could never have imagined this future, could never have predicted that spilling soup on the wrong or right customer would change her entire existence. But she wouldn't change a thing. Every moment, every choice, every challenge had led her here, to this life, to this love, to this man who'd seen something precious in a clumsy human and refused to let her go. They had forever now. And Rose intended to make the most of every single moment of it. The city below continued its eternal rhythm, humans and vampires coexisting in their careful balance. And above it all, two figures stood together, proof that sometimes the most unexpected encounters led to the most extraordinary destinies. That love could bridge the gap between human and monster, between mortal and immortal, between one heartbeat and eternity. Rose had spilled soup on a vampire king, and he had laughed and asked her name. From that moment, everything had changed, and in the end, it had changed for the better. They had each other, they had forever, and they had a love strong enough to last through centuries. It was more than enough. It was everything.